In this video, we are talking about everything wide receivers for week 10 of fantasy football, buy low, sell high candidates, second half breakouts, wide receivers who have the best playoff schedules. But before we get into it, if you can please like this video, subscribe to the channel if you do end up enjoying. Starting with buy lows first, my first guy I have for you is Lad McConkey, who had a solid performance in week 10, 5 receptions, 64 yards on 7 targets. 11.4 fantasy points, 94% route participation, which led the team. Yes, it was relatively disappointing coming off that monster game in week 8 where he had 29 fantasy points. You were hoping he got into the end zone last week. That just wasn't the case. But the underlying metrics and usage overall was still really nice, and it opens up a little small buy low window that I'd be taking advantage of right now if I were you, as the Chargers have all of a sudden turned into this pass-happy offense. From week 6 to 9. They rank 4th in neutral pass rate. So Jim Harbaugh and this coaching staff has decided to put the ball into Herbert's hands early on into the game, and then when they're up big, they can run out the clock. And on top of that, McConkey has one of the more favorable schedules for wide receivers the rest of the way, so how can you not like this? Like, we were kind of down on McConkey early on in the year. We knew he had the talent. We knew he had the quarterback, but they weren't throwing the football at a high rate. That has all changed, to many people's surprise. Like I said, they're giving Herbert the ball early and often. And who is he looking for more times than not? It's Lad. Yes, Quentin Johnson had that nice touchdown, which was on a blown coverage. Palmer, I believe, had 2 catches and a touchdown. Those are fluky things. Lad, the usage that he's getting, the route participation that he has, are things that are going to stay. He's going to have bigger and better days ahead. I would be buying low, because if you watch McConkey, he passes the eye test. He's a really good route runner. He's very savvy, but he has this quiet explosiveness to him as well. It's just a match made in heaven with Justin Herbert. And they didn't bring in any more competition, any more wide receivers at the trade deadline. I was kind of worried that Mike Williams might reunite with the Chargers again. That would have been a little knock on Lad, but that didn't happen. He's the clear-cut #1 target on an all-of-a-sudden pass-happy offense. I would be buying low now while you can. At number 2, Deebo Samuel has been very up and down all season long, but that's kind of what you sign up for when you draft Deebo. He is inconsistent at times. He doesn't catch a lot of passes at times. He gets injured often. Not great overall, as he has dealt with several injuries already this year. Seems like he's always hurt, but I think he's going to have a monster second half of the year, and here's why. We know Brandon Ayuk out for the season, which makes Samuel turn into the #1 target in the passing game. It's probably going to be close between Deebo and George, who's playing phenomenal football right now, but I would still give the edge to Deebo. And I think with CMC returning likely this week, that's going to help this offense as a whole. They're going to be able to move the football at ease like they did last year. They're going to be in scoring position more often. It's just going to put Deebo in better spots and more opportunities to score touchdowns, rack up fantasy points. This is still an elite San Francisco offense run by Kyle Shanahan, and they haven't looked great, mainly because of no CMC over the first part of the year, but that's all about to change. And I think that going forward, Deebo is going to be a huge part of this offense. And we know the talent that Samuel has when he's healthy, when he's on the field. He's explosive, he's elusive, he's special with the ball in his hands. And he also has a lot of different ways that he can score fantasy points, which we like as well. He currently ranks 6th in yards after contact per reception, so he's hard to tackle. If he can stay healthy with the addition of CMC, we've seen this movie before. Deebo can absolutely eat. I think he's going to have a monster second half of the year. And the 49ers are going to need all of Deebo that they can get, as they're struggling this year. They're not this dominant team that they have been in the past. But I do think they probably start to turn it on with their best player back on offense. And what do I always say? Bet on talented players in good situations with brilliant play callers and strong quarterback play. That fits the mold perfectly for Samuel. I think this is probably going to be your last chance to buy the talented receiver now at a fair price. So go after Deebo, get him on your team, and I think you're going to be pretty happy if you do so. All right, let's move on to some sell high candidates. First one, probably going to be pretty obvious to most people, and that's Jackson Smith-Njigba. I've been a big JSN fan all offseason. I've been telling you guys to draft him. I've been saying he's going to have this breakout campaign, this huge year, and yes, we've seen flashes, but for the most part, it's been a really big disappointment, as Jackson has only finished as a top 24 wide receiver twice this year. And in one of those games, there was no DK Metcalf, which was last week. But yes, talking about last week, he went crazy in week 9, as we all know. 7 catches, 180 yards, 2 touchdowns on 13 targets, 37 fantasy points. Probably should have had 200 plus receiving yards if it wasn't for several penalties, but nonetheless, he had a monster day. It just makes him a great sell high candidate because of the obvious. DK Metcalf didn't play in this game. Noah Fant wasn't active either, and yeah, Fant's not a big part of the offense, but he still earns some targets for Seattle. And on top of that, Seattle has the 31st ranked schedule for quarterbacks the remainder of the year, which means a lot of tough matchups ahead for Geno Smith, for this passing attack, which doesn't bode well for JSN. At the end of the day, we know this. JSN's value is never going to be higher than it is right now. So it doesn't hurt to send out some offers, feel out the market. If someone thinks that, JSN is still a young receiver. So if someone thinks this is the big breakout that we've all been waiting for, if someone thinks he's going to turn into this wide receiver 2 with upside for the remainder of the year, then I'd be selling him at that cost. And while I am a big fan of Jackson, he's just been underutilized. He's still the wide receiver 2 on this offense. Any given Sunday, Tyler Lockett can go for 7 catches, 100 yards, and a touchdown. I just think it's going to be too inconsistent. I think JSN is going to have another big game, of course, this year. It's just going to be hard to predict. So if you can get an upgrade at wide receiver or package him with someone else to get an upgrade at running back, then you need to do that now. At number 2, Cooper Kupp. If Kupp had this entire offense, this entire wide receiver room to himself, he would continue to go bonkers as Matthew Stafford's top target. But if you remember in week 8, when Nakua and Kupp returned, it was pretty apparent, it was pretty obvious to me that Puka is the wide receiver 1 on this offense. But we all know what happened last week. He threw a punch, got ejected, and in result, Kupp had a huge day. 11 catches, 104 yards on 14 targets, 21.4 fantasy points. And even if you believe that Kupp is still the wide receiver 1 on this offense, any Sunday that Puka is on the field with Kupp, I think his value, his upside drops. That's just the reality of the situation, because Stafford is going to look for both guys. They're going to have to share. They're both really good players, and I just don't think either one is going to have a huge day most of the time. Yes, can both guys eat in the same week? Of course, but both of their values do drop if they're both on the field. And at the end of the day, Kupp is still a 31-year-old receiver that has proven over the last couple of years that he just can't stay healthy. So I like Kupp. I like the situation. It's a very friendly wide receiver scheme that Sean McVay has in LA, but you always got to be looking to see if you can get Jamar Chase, let's say, for Cooper Kupp. Jamar Chase hasn't been that great, but I would still take Chase over Kupp rest of season, because T. Higgins always hurt, currently hurt. Chase doesn't have a ton of competition for targets most weeks. No, Mike Gesicki's not going to have these huge games that he had last week. So give me Chase over Kupp, if that's even a possibility of a trade, just because Puka is going to command a lot in this offense. And we know Puka is just a really good, young, talented receiver. I think selling Kupp high coming off a huge game is a smart decision if you are able to do so. All right, moving on to my second half breakouts, starting with Rome Odunze, who put together his second 100-yard performance of his young NFL career on Sunday and is starting to make some noise on the Chicago offense, and no one is really talking about it. And for good reason, as the Bears once again are just a disaster of a team on offense, kind of on defense as well at times, as we've seen. But from a fantasy perspective, Odunze is looking like a player who could be a league winner down the stretch. And Rome is somehow leading all Bears wide receivers in receiving yards right now with 391, and only ran 3 less routes than DJ Moore and Keenan Allen in week 9. I will caution by saying, remember, Shane Waldron is still the offensive coordinator who couldn't really get it done with DK Metcalf, JSN, and Tyler Lockett when he was with Seattle last year. I just don't think Waldron is a good coach. I don't think he's a good play caller. I don't think he's a good offensive coordinator. So yeah, maybe that's kind of weird. Why am I talking up Odunze if I don't trust Waldron? Well, maybe Waldron gets fired. Maybe he gets demoted. Who knows? Maybe he figures it out. That's a possibility. Maybe talent wins out in this situation, right? Every year is different. I still think Odunze can get it done if Waldron is calling the plays, but I just want to caution you. So this could easily blow up in our face, but not really, just because if you're trying to trade for Odunze right now, you can probably get him for pretty cheap. So there's not a lot of risk here. And I just think the upside is too good if everything hits. Remember, Keenan Allen, 32-year-old receiver who tends to wear down at the end of the season. We've seen it the last couple of years. He hasn't been able to close it out. He's been getting hurt at the end of the season. And if that happens this year, then Odunze vaults into the number 2 target. And that would be really big. Obviously, we're not rooting for an injury, or we can't predict an injury to occur. But just looking at the history of Keenan Allen, he tends to be injury prone, and he's an older receiver. So that doesn't help either. And the Bears have a really easy remaining schedule for wide receivers. Like, take a look at this. It doesn't get much better than this. They get Minnesota in week 12 and week 15, which is the first week of the fantasy playoffs. And then they get the Lions in week 13 and week 16, the second week of the fantasy playoffs. And those are 2 teams that you can absolutely throw the football on. So those are 4 matchups right there that are going to be high scoring games if Chicago can figure out their offense. But 2 really good offenses in Minnesota and Detroit that the Bears are going to be chasing points against. This isn't some nobody. This is an elite talent coming out of college, coming out of Washington, where he was absolutely dominant. So try to acquire a really talented player that, if everything shakes right, I would not be shocked if Rome continues to emerge down the stretch as one of the top targets for the Bears offense, and is someone that you can acquire now for cheap that has league-winning upside. At number 2, George Pickens. It just feels like Pickens has been so close to one of these monster performances, these 20, 30-plus fantasy point games, and he just hasn't gotten it. And whether that's been because of all the bad penalties that have been called after Pickens scores a touchdown or after he makes a big play, there's the flag on the ground. Yes, last week he couldn't get 2 feet down. That didn't help either. But it's been a lot of ticky-tacky calls right as Pickens is making a huge play. It's just been really unfortunate. But George looks like a completely different receiver with Russell Wilson under center, who's also playing really good football right now. It's kind of surprising to see, but really nice to see. And I think the addition of Mike Williams, who was just traded to Pittsburgh from the Jets yesterday, is going to help. He's going to maybe take away some of the double teams away from George, give him a little more room to work with. No, Mike Williams isn't the wide receiver he used to be, but he's still a guy that defenses have to respect. And on top of that, the second half of the schedule for Pickens is juicy as he gets the Commanders in week 10, maybe a little bit harder now with Marshawn Lattimore. We'll see if he actually plays in week 10. Baltimore in week 11 and week 16, who is a pass funnel defense at this point, along with getting the Cleveland Browns twice. And with the Steelers having one of the worst remaining schedules for running backs, they're going to really start to have to throw the football at a higher rate. And it's pretty obvious to me that George is going to have a special second half of the season and needs to be added onto your team as soon as possible. Now let's talk about some wide receivers who have really good playoff schedules, starting with Malik Neighbors. Yes, it's been not so great for Neighbors, and I don't know how much better it's going to get, but if you can acquire him in a trade for relatively cheap, then absolutely do it. It's been a little bit shaky for the Giants since they lost their stud left tackle. Just feels like Daniel Jones has no time to throw the football, no time for Neighbors to get downfield, and it's starting to turn Malik into this short A-dot player, which is not great for racking up fantasy points, but he's still an elite talent. If the Malik owner in your league is a little discouraged, then try to buy Neighbors for cheap, because he can still get it done with a really nice playoff schedule up ahead. At number 2 for me, it's DJ Moore. We talked about Rome Odunze. DJ Moore, man, has just been so disappointing. Like these last 3-4 games, he's under double-digit fantasy points. It's brutal. Even in good matchups, he just looks like he doesn't care out there. He doesn't look like he has a good rapport with Caleb Williams. But at the end of the day, we know the talent that Moore has, and you're just hoping that they figure it out, because his remaining schedule, his playoff schedule, is absolute gold. So I'd be trying to get him on your team now and just pray that the Bears offense, Caleb Williams, really starts to click, really starts to figure it out. Next guy up is Jaden Reed, who finally had a nice bounce back performance in week 9. He had 5 catches, I believe, for over 100 yards, which was really nice to see even in terrible weather conditions, windy, rain, and Reed is just a really good player on a good offense with a nice schedule. So another guy that if you have on your roster, keep him, hold him. Big days are ahead, I believe, for Jaden and in the playoffs with that schedule on an elite Packers offense. And then the last guy I have is CeeDee Lamb. It's not looking great for Lamb. He has that AC joint injury. Dak is now on IR with that hamstring, which if you're in a situation, if you have a really good team, a really good record, and you can wait for Lamb to really go off in the fantasy playoffs, then I'd be trying to get him on your team now, because maybe the CeeDee owner is absolutely panicking with him being hurt, with Dak being hurt. I still think CeeDee is going to be fine once the fantasy playoffs roll around, once Dak is back. So if you can buy him now, get him on your team, because the playoff schedule is really nice. That's all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching. If you took away anything from the video, if you can please like the video, subscribe to the channel. It helps me out more than you know, and I will see you in the next one.